Dayan Emet, Shofet Tzedek v'Emet. Baruch Dayan Emet, Shekom Mishpatav Tzedek v'Emet. True judge, judge of righteousness and truth. Blessed is the true judge, for all of God's judgments are righteous and true. Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yishem Adonai Mevarach. The Lord is given, and the Lord is taken away. Blessed is the name of the Lord. We'll begin with the Psalms of David, Psalm 15, which describes an honest and righteous man. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai mi yagor ba'olecha, mi yishkon b'har kodshecha. Holech tamim fol tzedek v'dover emet b'vavo. L'ragal l'shono lo'asa l'rei hara v'cherpa lo nasa al krovo. Nivza be'inav nimas v'tirei Adonai yechabed. Nishba la'ara v'lo yamir kaspa lo natan v'neshach v'shochad al noki lo lokach. Ose ele lo yimot li'olam. A song of David. Lord, who may sojourn in your tent, who may dwell on your holy mountain? One who walks in purity, does what is righteous, and speaks the truth from the heart, who has no slander on the tongue, nor has done harm to a fellow, nor cast disgrace towards a neighbor, in whose eyes a contemptible person is repulsive, but who honors those who are in awe of the Lord, who swears truthfully even to personal hurt and never retracts, who does not lend money on interest, nor take a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things shall never falter. Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai ro'eh lo achzor. Benodesha yarbidseni, al me menuchot yina'aleni. Nafshe yishovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeitz amavet. Lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha mishantecha hema yinachamuni. Tarach lefanai shocha neget zarorai. Shanta v'Hashem en roshi kosi revaya. Achto v'chesed yudafuni kol yemei chayai. V'shafti b'veit Adonai li orachimhim. A song of David, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous path for God's name's sake. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You've anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Friends, we are gathered here today to pay tribute and to give honor to Bernard Otterman, Dov Mordechai ben David Ephraim HaKohen, beloved husband of Sandra for 48 years, father of Sharon and Raj, Michael and Jessica, Michelle and Peter, proud grandfather, David and Sarah, Rishi and Sashi and Bodhi, beloved brother of Harry, beloved son of Dina and David of blessed memory. Family is also very thankful for all the relatives and friends who have joined them there from near and far to give Bernard the honor that he deserves. Everyone dies, but not everyone really lives. It's this quote that came to mind as I sat on 29 Meadow Road this past summer with Bernard and Sandra. Bernard was frail. He was weak. He was not like the pictures I had seen or even the videos that I saw on YouTube of him when he was speaking. His hands shook as he gifted me his book, Black Grass, which I very much cherish and just was reading this past Sunday. And then he calmly, in a soft voice, shared some of the things that he had done in his life, what he had been through, his different experiences. And he said something that continues to ring in my head. He said, I always felt I had survived for a purpose. to make this world a little bit better. Teaching, running a business, writing, speaking, raising a family, and even at this stage in his life, Bernard was still living. No one wanted to live more than Bernard. Everyone dies, but not everyone lives. Today we have several speakers, and you'll listen to the details of Bernard's life. And as you listen, you'll realize that this was a life that was truly lived. Our speakers today will begin with Rabbi Lucas, Rabbi Alan Lucas of Temple Beth Shalom of Roslyn. Will be followed by Sandra, who will be reading a poem. Then followed by Sharon, by Harry, Bernard's brother. Then Michelle and Michael. And then Rabbi Lucas will close as well. Rabbi Lucas.
The thoughts of we who are gathered here today are filled with recollections of Bernard Otterman. We are bound together in a bond of common sorrow. Our tears join us on the sad occasion of his death. Lord, as we are grateful to you for the bounties of life, even so do we accept the evening calm of death. Sometimes death comes suddenly and violently, but for Bernard, it came quietly and brought with it peace to the weary and to the heavy laden. Jewish tradition insists that for those who have lived fully, death is not to be looked upon with fear, but rather to be accepted with equanimity, coming as the natural close of a long and a good life. Bernard Otterman was a very fortunate man. Well, some of you may protest. How could I make such a claim? How could I suggest that a man who lost so much of his family in the Shoah, who himself spent the war in labor camps with his parents, who spent his early years fleeing always one step ahead of the Nazis, who, if they caught him, would surely kill him. A man who lived through the worst evil perpetrated upon mankind, who began again after the war and created a new life, a new family, through their love and through their children and through his grandchildren. A man who came to a new country with nothing, who spent his life working hard, a self-made man and a self-made success. Yes, I insist that despite all the challenges and trials of his life, this was a truly fortunate man. And I claim this because as you will listen to the loving tributes offered by his family, you will hear something beyond the history of what happened to Bernard Otterman. You will, if you listen carefully to what they are saying, be able to catch a glimpse of the measure of the man who confronted these most trying of circumstances. His life can be fierce. Life can drive us in desperate quarters. It sometimes places mountains of sorrow and anxiety upon us, and Bernard Otterman belongs to a select group of survivors who understood this in a way our generation will never understand. But what is most remarkable about Bernard Otterman is not what he endured, but how he endured it. Despite all the difficult and differing situations in his life, he retained an invincible attitude of determination and strength. So this then becomes not a sad funeral of a man who struggled and suffered, but the celebration of a life well lived and a life that triumphed over all the obstacles that were placed in his way, a life of joy and a life of love. In his later years, Bernard turned to writing. He took his memories and translated them into poems. So at this time, I'd like to call on Sandra to read one of those poems.
I'd like to start this part of the service with one of Bernard's poems. It's titled, When is the Time? Waiting room with walls papered in red and gray, doors open to other rooms where life is measured by x-rays, diagnosis pronounced after payment is made. When the mind is strong, who will kill the body for the soul to fly? Yellow skin, tinged orange by Benadine, monitors on wall flash blips of green, wires, red and black, plastic tubing, blue and clear, connect him to machines. His arm drinks for him. Who is ready to let the soul leave when the body is weak? Who is to decide when he cannot speak? Thank you.
So the children are going to address different periods of our dad's life, and so I'm going to start with the Holocaust. Until I became a mother myself, I don't think I fully understood what an incredible act of will had saved my dad from the flames. He was born, as many of you know, in 1937 in Lodz, Poland, in one of the worst times and places in history for a Jewish child to be born. When the world began to close around them in 1939, his mother paid close attention. She had 10 siblings and step-siblings, 10, right? But most of them stayed put. But Dina had a feeling it would not be good to be closed into a ghetto with this particular little toddler. So she turned on her survival sense and she began to run. The miraculous stories of survival that followed were our bedtime stories growing up. There was the story of how his mother had thrown him off a train when the Germans started checking papers, and how she couldn't find him after she herself jumped. Three circles in the sky over 3 blonde Polish women led her to him. When they were starving in the countryside after escaping from the line to the train to Auschwitz, they saw a soldier in World War I garb sleeping under a tree. They were so tired they said the Shema and went to sleep near him. The next morning, he was gone, leaving a depression in the grass, and a short walk away was the miraculous bloom of a cherry tree, laden with fruit out of season. There was the prisoner number he had been given at the work camp, 1818. For Jews, you can't get luckier than that. When Dad told us these stories, he never ended with a heavy-handed moral such as, "You see how God saved us?" The salvation was instead described as a mixture of brilliant decision-making on my grandmother's part, extraordinary luck, again and again, and some kind of ineffable spiritual presence showing itself in signs. To be honest, I don't think he quite wanted to believe that God had directly intervened to save him when nearly his entire extended family perished. Because that raises the question that all survivors face: why me? Is there something that I'm supposed to do to repay this gift? Because, of course, it's impossible to repay a gift of that magnitude. My father was a child in the Holocaust. He was in the camps and on the run from the ages of 3 to the age of 8. So his memories of the Holocaust were those of a child. When I asked, he said he remembered how the dust looked in the beam of sun that shone into the barracks, the hue of his mother's red lipstick, playing with other boys in the work camp, the taste of the brown bread. He didn't always remember the miracles, even though for the rest of his life cherries were his favorite fruit. When I became a mother, I began to understand that our bedtime stories were the same ones that his mother had told him. As she sought to explain to a young, brilliant little boy how he had survived. What was real and what was embellished, we will never know. As he got older, Dad began to wonder if he was saved so his children could accomplish great things. He wasn't sure he had done enough, but he had done an amazing job in his own life. He graduated from high school a year early with honors, though he had immigrated to the U.S. in the 9th grade. He worked for Grumman on rocket engines and got his PhD in mechanical engineering. He became the chairman of the department at Hofstra. He even ran for city council in Boston at one point. He took over his parents' real estate business with his brother Harry and ran it with great success. He wrote short stories based on his war experience. He finished a novel. He was a great son, husband, and father to 3 children, instilling in them a spirit of inquiry and the importance of truth, justice, hard work, and service to others. Was it enough? I think so, Dad, it was enough. We have known for years what he wants on his tombstone. The phrase, a brand plucked from the fire, and the symbol of the Holocaust, the Jewish star wrapped in barbed wire. Dad may have not known the why of his salvation, but he knew that his salvation was a miracle. Let the why stand as a mystery for the generations.
This is tough. I'm going to speak about the time after the war, basically, and before real estate and all the business success of my brother. When the war was over, there was no parades for them. There was no real opening of doors and celebrations. Actually, my mother and brother were in a farmhouse, and the Russians were approaching from the east, and the Germans were sort of fighting. They weren't like really putting up a big battle, but they definitely did fight, and so the shooting started around the farmhouse, and everyone in the family laid down on the floor so they wouldn't get hit by spare bullets. And then miraculously, the shooting stopped, and they were just about to get up off the floor and figure out what to do next when 2 German soldiers burst into the farmhouse, full, in uniform and carrying guns. And my mother always said that she thought that's it. It lasted so long and going to die today. But the German soldiers threw down their weapons, took off their uniforms, and had civilian clothing and knapsacks, put it on, and said, "Auf Wiedersehen." Anyway, so my parent, they pulled them, my mother and brother, they pulled themselves together and somehow got to Lodge, the city where they lived and they were born, and they were then joined by 2 cousins, two of my cousins. They're my mother's nieces, and they sort of started a family. I just want, I'm an accountant, so we have to do some accounting. My mother, as Sharon said, had 10 siblings, and my father had 1, so that's 11. And to use a sports phrase, we were 0-11. We had no uncles, we had no aunts. We did have a great uncle. 2 great uncles that actually survived because they left Europe during the war and survived in Israel. So, it was pretty devastating, but they were determined to make a go of it. Well, so the war is over. So what do? You go on vacation. Bernard had the opportunity to go to a wonderful camp. I'm not sure, it was in, as Mark will know, Zakopane, a beautiful, beautiful part of Poland. And that was the beginning of his rehabilitation. He had never seen a doctor, he had never seen a dentist, and he'd never been in school. And you say 8, I say 9. Anyway, through other miracles, it turned out that my father was alive. My father was very, very fortunate. He was a very lucky man, and my brother and I inherited his luck. He was liberated by American soldiers, so he had gotten American papers and made his way back to Lodz went with the communists. They knew the communists were taking over, and all the bad feelings of Poland. They decided to go back to Germany, and they went to a small town for a while because they needed to be as close to the food supply as possible. Things stabilized in Germany. I'm not exactly sure what schools he went to when he was living in. He may have actually been in sleepaway schools, but they ultimately moved to Munich, Germany, which is still a very substantial town, and with a lot of help of the United States Army and the Jewish organizations like Joint and Hayas, got a lot of help and started their way on rehabilitation. And then I was born, so I'm going to try to. Most of what I want to talk about is what I remember. We were in Germany, and everybody thought we were going to be going to Israel. So Bernard went to a school where he didn't know any German, so he had to learn German. And because everyone was going to Israel, they thought he had to learn Hebrew. So but that was a very, very good school, and it started his academic career there. Ultimately, it was decided not to go to Israel. The few relatives that we had there said the life was really, really impossible, so we delayed it. We said we'll just, we'll try to come to the United States. And my namesake, Harry Truman, signed a bill allowing displaced people into the United States, and we were allowed, with the help of Hayas, we were brought to the United States. We actually traveled on a Liberty ship and came to the United States. We were sponsored by a family in Providence, Rhode Island, and we lived in Providence. Bernard started high school. My two memories of high school, Bernard was, we didn't have any money, so he was still wearing his European clothing. A couple of guys started making fun of him, and he punched one of them so hard that he broke his wrist. I'm not exactly sure what happened to the other guy, but and he did graduate with honors and made the University of Rhode Island. I went there. I guess the highlight that I know of the University of Rhode Island is he took a boxing course and taught my mother and I how to box. So I guess pretty useful, actually. So anyway, it's time to take another inventory. So it's now 1955. It's 9 years. Bernard had to learn only 4 languages and had to accustom himself to 3 cultures. Not bad. Okay, so Providence was kind of a dead end, and we decided to come to New York, and we started living in the Bronx. Bernard went to City College of New York. He did well there. He joined the fraternity, and I think for me the highlight was he met Jane Mansfield. He graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. This was the middle of the space program. He was immediately hired, by Rocketdyne Corporation. He moved to Los Angeles and helped build rocket engines. After a while there, he decided that he wanted to be back with his family in New York and got a job working for Grumman right here on Long Island. And he worked on the lunar excursion module, which actually took us to the moon. So now and not only that, he worked on probably the most important piece of equipment on that module, which was the valve that would open the fuel both in space and on the moon. And if the valve didn't open, I mean, the first time then they just wouldn't land on the moon, and they could come back. But once they landed on the moon, that valve had to work, or they would be stuck there. There was no contingency plan. So, I mean, they worked on that valve for a long, long, long time, and the rest is history. He helped land people on the moon. Anyway, while he was there, Bernard never could resist a freebie, and his company allowed him to go to college in the evening and paid for it, so he got a free master's degree from UCLA. Again, he wanted to come back to New York, and he came back to New York, and he started at NYU. That didn't really work out for him, and he switched to Stony Brook, and got a PhD in engineering in 1967, the year I graduated from high school. He then went on to teach in Northeastern, spent a few years up there, and then he was hired to work at the Hofstra-Pratt engineering program and became chairman of the department. And in 1977, engineering was contracting greatly, and he decided that it was time to leave academia, and he came to work in our business, and the rest, I guess, is history. So, anyway, that's the story up until that point of Bernard, and I just wanted to say that Bernard and our family are proof that you can imprison us, you can torture us, you can kill us, and you can burn us, but you will never break our spirit or defeat us.
Thank you. For those who might not recognize me, I'm Michelle, the oldest daughter, and I live in Australia, so I do recognize a lot of familiar faces, but to those, especially in the back rows, so hello everyone, and thank you for coming. I'll pick up a little bit from where Uncle Harry left off and reflect on some memories of my dad from my childhood, which is mainly in Merrick, and the way that his view of the world kind of shaped mine as well. As we've heard already from Sharon and Harry, that my father's childhood shaped him in many ways, and not least in the way he viewed boundaries. As a PhD student, he wrote about boundary layers in liquids, and he certainly had ambivalence toward boundaries in his life. For him, boundaries were to be tested, crossed, and challenged. From taking my little brother Mike for a play in the neighbor's yard without even a thought of private property, to an infamous Merrick memory of insulting Ohav members' kosher sensibilities by taunting him with a slice of bacon at a New Year's party. So he often made choices that exasperated, embarrassed, but usually entertained the rest of us. He also felt quite free to dispense advice to anyone at any time. Even people called him Rabbi, I think, because they came to him for wise counsel and maybe not so wise counsel. His strong opinions included the best way to travel to Manhattan, never the LIE. What to do on a sunny day, never see a matinee, it's just a waste of time. So actually, I don't recall my parents ever seeing a movie during the daytime, and for years I never went as well. Just it was a waste of a good day. Never order a soda or a pasta as a main course at a restaurant because it costs the restaurant nothing to make and they're just taking the money from you.
So again, I've never ordered a pasta as my main course until maybe the past 10 years. So finally, it was better to read and study on the weekend than instead of working at a minimum wage job at Baskin-Robbins or TCBY. And that was advice that I appreciated because it was a luxury that he never had when he grew up. So he was able to provide that space and time for his children to reflect and read and study on the weekends, which was lovely. So while his disregard for boundaries sometimes made people uncomfortable, most of you in this room can probably recall an incident or two. It also drove him to push the limits in his professional and personal life. I also have memories of my father working at Hofstra as a professor, and I just remember him talking about aggravation and ulcers, where it's a lot of what happened in those times of year. In some ways, he was a consummate academic, as his academic educational career shows, but it seemed as if the university context just didn't suit him. Now that I work at a university myself, I can imagine how he must have battled against the Byzantine, bureaucratic, and highly political environment that academia does provide for those that embed themselves in it. An eventual departure was not surprising. Then he did go on to the family real estate business, but what you haven't heard is that it was originally called HBO. And that lasted only a short time until the cease and desist order came from the other HBO, asking them to please change the name. Another aspect of the Norcor family business is that, as the term family business implies, there was little distinction between the personal and the professional in that office. Despite mine and others' best offers, it made me looking at Jessica, and my husband tried as well, there was never an employee handbook or an operating manual. There's never been any policy about anything. All decisions made and checks were signed by my father and his brother Harry. And we have in the room today a number of people that have worked in that office for 20 plus years. So obviously that approach does work. 30 years. So thank you for coming. And a lot of people as well that have known my father in that capacity, where personal and professional were always the same. At home, the governance structure of our family was best described as a daddy dictatorship, which for the most part was a benign one. My father insisted on getting at least 2 extra votes during family meetings, and at going first at Scrabble, claiming that not having English as a first language put him at a disadvantage. And to the last time we played, he insisted still on going first, despite the fact that he's a published author and poet. So that's how he approached Scrabble as well. So we did respect my father's boundary pushing as children, mainly because he did, after all, have our best interests at heart. As adults, we have to draw our own boundaries, and this led to some inevitable conflicts as each of the children established their own lives. We all push the boundaries of his expectation with our choices of who to marry, where to work, and where to live. However, in later years, my father mellowed and became more sensitive. The boundaries had shifted again, opening and bringing people into a shared experience of his world, rather than dividing them and us. It is this softening and warmth that is how I remember my father today.
I think the phrase shared experience is really apt. As we started to clean his room and clean the house, I came across like a strange-looking notebook, and on the back it says it's a reproduction of an elegant 14th century Egyptian Quran. Okay, what's this? So I open it up, and it's actually a journal that he kept very briefly 2 years ago. I don't think he'd mind. It's not so personal if I just share just a snippet of the journal. It's dated February 5th, 2015, so 2 years ago. Dear self, it was snowing hard when Ping arrived, period. As you know, Ping would pick him up to go to work. And then it just kind of oddly stops there, so I flip the book over, and it continues. Dear self, second attempt. Started writing on the last page with this book upside down. Hopefully, it is a sign that the end will be the opposite of the beginning, and I will return to my family and friends, not cured, but stable and full of energy to accomplish some of my goals. So, I'm really talking about the last 5 years or so of his life. As his body maybe diminished, his mind and his ideas and his goals did not, and if anything, they were like kicked into high gear, and that manifested in very significant and kind of almost world-changing ways. He got serious about our family foundation, meaning he started to think intentionally about not just giving $50 here and $20, but things that he could use it for to make the world truly like a better place, because he has a history of activism as well. Like he proudly talked about marching on the very first front, holding the banner on the first Earth Day in Boston. That was celebrated, and he started student groups and other activist groups during his university days. And so with the foundation, he in a sense he turned to me because I was here. I'd moved back to New York already at this time to help him kind of bring this foundation online. And so we started and supported many new things. For example, the first act that this like a reinvigorated foundation supported was helping Bedouin students in the Negev in Israel, which helped them pass their matriculation exam in 12th grade, which without passing that exam, your future is basically non-existent in Israel. And unfortunately, the government doesn't fund the Bedouin schools quite as well as the other schools. And then we, staying in the Middle East, my father was very fearful of nuclear threats, about Iran and other problems in the region, and so he just had this idea. And he didn't study Middle East politics or foreign affairs and that kind of stuff, but he had this vague intuition that the knowledge of the effects of nuclear weapons, while it's very low in this country, maybe it's non-existent, if anything, in the Middle East, where you have Israel with nuclear weapons, Iran trying to get nuclear weapons, etc. And so he started a program with another nonprofit that educates Middle Eastern teachers and North African teachers about the horrors of nuclear war, to bolster this kind of gap of understanding in the region about what would actually happen if only maybe 4 or 5 of these weapons were detonated, the entire globe, we would have a global famine. I suggest maybe researching this because it's quite shocking, and this is where he put his emphasis there. So that's the foundation he got up and running, but he also finished his novel. I'm going through these papers now. He has thousands of drafts and thousands of corrections, all handwritten, for his novel Self-Deliverance, which is a fictionalized account of Arthur Koestler, also like a refugee, also a thinker like my father, very, very well-regarded intellectual in the 50s. And it's a novel about Arthur Koestler and his life. And he re-edited all of his short stories, which were published about a decade ago in the collection Black Grass. He re-edited them and re-released them in a collection called Inmate 1818, which, again, I recommend finding this, and we have copies because it's very special. And so it shows that he had this determination, these goals to finish. The last short story, and I just stumbled upon this again, which was never published. If time allows, it'll take about 5 minutes. I'd like to read. It's only 3 pages. And it's called My First Taste of Chicken Soup. And I recall how this all came about, we were sitting in, I think, in the backyard, and he said, "I had the strangest dream last night. It was about chicken soup." I was like, that's bizarre. And then he like kind of teared up, and I was like, "What?" He's like, "I remember the smell." I was like, "Okay." And then a few weeks later, he had this story. So I'll read it. The morning ration was a hunk of black bread, 1 pat of margarine, sometimes a spoonful of marmalade, and saccharin for the liquid called coffee, boiling water poured over roasted chicory. The evening ration was similar, but instead of the coffee, we had vegetables with barley, my favorite, or another grain mixed in. Hungry and thirsty, each morning after roll call, I would run back to the bunk I shared with my mother and crawl under our thin blanket. I usually would sleep for a couple of hours and wake up around 8 o'clock. I'd reach for the piece of bread Mother had left for me. It was my morning piece of bread, cut in half and folded over on itself, with Mother's pat of margarine added to mine. Mother was always trying to fatten me up. She insisted that I needed the margarine more than she. It's true, I was skinny, but not much thinner than most of the other boys of my age in the camp. Towards the end, as I remember it, there were about 20 boys and no girls. After finishing my piece of bread, I would walk to the big potbelly stove in the middle of the barrack, find our cooking pot, and drink a few sips of warm water. After the war, I learned that our labor camp, located in the town of Rodham, had been very different from the other labor camps established by the Germans in Poland during World War II. It had been organized in August 1942 as the Rodham ghetto was liquidated. Approximately 30,000 Jews were transported to their deaths in Treblinka, and about 2,500 moved to this labor camp. Inmates worked as slaves in the nearby Daimler weapons factory that produced small arms and munitions. Each inmate had its own bunk and barrack, and each barrack was heated by the large potbelly stove. The infirmary, kitchen, and shower barracks were sparse, but decent. Perhaps it was the German factory managers who had prevailed on the SS to provide adequate food rations to inmates. They wanted to maintain a high production level, and therefore needed alert and skilled workers. Almost to the end, no one in our camp died of starvation. But in the spring of 1944, as Russian troops advanced westwards, conditions in both the camp and factory deteriorated. We, the remaining children in the camp, came to the attention of the SS. They thought it was wasteful to feed us unless we also worked. On a clear and balmy morning during the first week of May, as the roll call drew to a close, an SS guard shouted a new order at the capos. The capos ordered each boy to step out of the row and line up. All the men and women of the camp watched. We, the children, were lined up into a column with 2 to each row. As the youngest, I was almost 7.5 years old. I formed the tail of the column without a companion. As Mother later told me, she and most other inmates thought that the SS had decided we should be shot or moved to another camp where we would be killed. That is why she, plus several other women, started to cry and sob. With a capo leading, we headed towards the administration barrack as the roll call was dismissed. Once there, we were loaded onto a truck and driven a short distance to a squat brick building. We entered through a backyard door directly into a well-lit room. At its center stood a table and a few women on both sides. A German guard shouted an order, and the women stood up and left the room. After they left, I noticed that the center of the table was covered with metal trays. Later, as we were seated on the benches, I saw that on each tray lay a cut-up chicken. Our job was to grab a tray and find the head, feet, gizzard, and wingtips and throw them into a gray bucket behind us. When finished, we pushed the tray to the left end of the table, where a Polish woman was waiting. She would then pick up 3 or 4 trays and carry them to a room behind her. At first, we were slow at our task, and the capo guarding us cursed us. But by midday, we were doing our job well. That is also when the surprise happened. We stopped working, and the 2 burly Polish women came into the room, each carrying a tray with large bowls of soup on it. They placed a bowl in front of each child. The soup was yellowish, but clear enough to see gizzards, wingtips, and chicken feet floating in it. After the spoons were handed out, I tasted it. Now, as an old man, I could still remember this wonderful, delicious taste. But I don't think or tell of it often because it makes me cry. And so, this was written a little over a year ago. So he was very active throughout these final years. But I'll end these remarks with a poem. My mom started this portion of the proceedings with a heavier poem that he had written, which I think was inspired by my grandmother's time in a hospital. But this poem was inspired by a letter he got from the IRS. It was some type of demand letter because they thought he had died. This is in the mid-90s. And so this is titled, Note to the IRS. Your notice notwithstanding, I am very much alive. There is no reason why I should now file a state tax form 705. Under penalties of perjury, I declare that the information provided herein is both true and fair. Please accept this reply as is, without form 1359. IRS reply, edited. Based on your information, we agree that you are not required to file. We are taking no further action at this time, but we will contact you should this tax issue arise.
So I began by calling Bernard Otterman a fortunate man. I think now you understand exactly what I meant. A man who witnessed the worst of what mankind was possible and yet became a man who seemed to embody the best of what mankind could be. How easy it would have been, considering what he had witnessed, to have been crushed by adversity. Not Bernard Otterman. Rather than becoming morose or hostile or resentful, he became more human, more sensitive, more loving. What a remarkable man. What a remarkable life. In the few years I was privileged to know Bernard, there were a few themes that ran through our conversations. One was his sense of gratitude for having survived. Here we were at the distance of some 70 plus years, and he was still amazed that, in fact, he did survive. He repeatedly gave credit to the courage and cunning of his mother and father, especially his mother, and to what he repeatedly referred to as a miracle. I can think of no other way to explain it, he once said. The issue of his survival was a theme that constantly preoccupied him. Did he survive for a purpose? Was there something he was supposed to be doing with his life? And purpose or not, did he have a responsibility as a result of the fact that he did survive? I think his turning to writing in his later years was born out of this sense of responsibility. The translation of his memories into poetry was a painful process for him, and yet he would be the first to admit it was an enlightening process for him and certainly for all of us who read his poems. I remember a Tikkun Leil Shavuot a few years back when one of our sessions at the synagogue featured a reading by Bernard of some of his poems and then a discussion with members of our congregation. Later that evening, when I thanked him for participating in our evening of study, he said, "No, thank you, Rabbi. This is why I wrote these poems." For Bernard, his writing was not only a catharsis, but a way of remembering and of teaching. Another theme that recurred in many of our conversations was his pride in the three of you, Michelle, Sharon, Michael. I know it was not always an easy burden you carried, being the children of someone who felt that not only his, but yours was a legacy of survival, a duty to tell the story and to learn from his experience. But he loved the fact that, in his words, each of you in one way or another had chosen life's work that contributed to Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Bernard had experienced the extreme brokenness of this world, the inhumanity of which man was capable, and he dedicated his life to fixing that which was wrong in our world. You heard it mentioned as a student, he formed an organization called Students for World Cooperation. He was inspired by the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize and Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov. And his foundation, as you heard, was another expression of this commitment in real and very tangible ways to do concrete things that would repair the world. But I suspect that Bernard was also aware that the concept of tikkun olam, as it is beautifully expressed in the Aleinu prayer, is part of a larger phrase, l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to underscore that this repair had to be conducted in the kingdom of God, to underscore that this was a partnership between man and God to improve the world. In our tradition, we understood that we could not do it without God's help, and God seemed to understand that he needs us as vehicles of worldly redemption. As we spoke last night, Bernard wrestled with this through his life, with this God part of the equation. His relationship with God was, shall we say, complicated. But how could someone who witnessed and experienced what he saw not have a complicated relationship with God? But complicated or not, there was a relationship. And his involvement with and love of Judaism was a constant throughout his life. He wrestled with this notion that he and you, his children, fulfilled this mandate to not only repair the world, but to do so as Jews, in the context of a sense of Jewish history and Jewish destiny. We spoke of how he wrestled with the fact that although you each chose loving mates, good people whom he came to love and admire, he wrestled with his concern about creating a Jewish future and wanting his grandchildren to not only be part of the world values he had embraced, but the Jewish values and life that was so important to him. And now his struggle is your struggle. The other constants in his life were his love for his family, not only you as children, but Sandra. You met at a single weekends at the Concord and would spend the next 48 plus years together creating a life and creating a family together. And another constant was you, Harry. He not only worked with you, but you were never far from his thoughts. It's worth noting that my last conversation with Bernard, just a little over a week or two ago, is he reached out to seek my help in resolving a family matter. His love for you, his family, his passion for creating a world of love and peace and harmony were the guiding stars of his life. There's more that could be said, maybe more that should be said, but we have tested your patience already. I hope this will be the beginning and not the end of a process of telling and retelling his story. To begin again, to always be willing to begin again. And you, his family, his beloved family, you were his ultimate victory, his greatest triumph of love over hate and of life over death. Bernard Otterman could shut his eyes for the last time and rest knowing he had won, that victory was his. He had triumphed over all the evil forces that tried to consume him. Yes, I insist that Bernard Otterman was a very fortunate man, not because of the fate he was forced to endure, but because of the measure of the man that endured it. So what can we say to you? Sandra, Michelle, Sharon, and Michael, Harry, to all the family. What can we say to a family who now feels the pain of loss as intensely as you now feel the loss of Bernard, who so filled your lives with love, with beauty, and with strength? There are indeed occasions too deep for words. But remember this: death ends life, but it does not end a relationship. You are bound to Bernard by 1,000 bonds that death cannot destroy. His life ends, but his message continues, his example survives, his influence endures. O God, who dost bring thy children out of the darkness and the shadow of death, we thank thee for the life of Bernard Otterman. In his friendship we were blessed, by whose understanding we were guided, and in whose tenderness we were healed. May the sureness of his nearness to us banish loneliness from our hearts, and the sureness of his nearness to thee, O God, quiet our anxious spirit. Be with those who most poignantly and most painfully feel the pangs of this hour. With Sandra, with Michelle and Peter, Sharon and Raj, Michael and Jessica, with his grandchildren David and Sarah, Rishi and Sashi, and the newest member of the family just born a couple weeks ago, Bodhi, with all the family and friends. Comfort and strengthen their hearts, guide and direct their lives, help them to know that deeper than the pains, the frustration, and even the mystery of death are your everlasting arms of love and mercy. Grant them steadfastness of purpose, faith in thee, and courage to face life. Give them the wisdom to say with understanding the ancient words of submission and resignation, perhaps the wisest words that could be said at an hour such as this. Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mivarach. Lord, you have given, and now you have called unto yourself. We praise thee, O God, for the courage to make our broken hearts an altar before which we may acknowledge thy sovereignty and love. May thy name be praised now and forevermore. And let us say, Amen. Would you please rise for the memorial prayer? Emale rachamim, shochen bamromim, hamtzei menucha nechona, tachat kanfei hashchina, b'marot kedoshim u'tohorim, k'zohar rakia mazirim, et nishmat Dov Mordechai ben David Ephraim HaKohen V'Dina Shalach Li'olamo B'Gan Eden Menuchato Ana Balarachamim Hasireu B'Seter Kenafecha Li'olamim Utzoro B'Tzora Chaim Et Nishmato Adonai Unachalato V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. To the soul of Dov Mordechai ben David Ephraim HaKohen V'Dina, to the soul of Bernard Otterman who is gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and the righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is his portion. May he now rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.